Alright guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to talk about buying used guns. We're going to talk about some myths and misconceptions, some things that you might want to pay attention to as you're going through and assessing and appraising different firearms, different used firearms for purchase, as well as some resources to utilize if you are deciding to go ahead and buy some pre-used firearms. Alright, so right off the bat, why don't we go ahead and get into myths and misconceptions. I've been in a lot of gun shops over the years. I've been a lot of people looking to buy guns and all that kind of stuff, and they've had an aversion to buying used guns, and there's a couple of reasons. I think the most valid one is a concern about the care that was taken of the firearm, whether or not the firearm is in good working order, whether or not it has been maintained in the appropriate manner, and all that kind of stuff, which is a very viable concern. I understand that completely. I can understand the reservations involved with that. Other reasons that I've heard is that there's concern about what the firearm has been used for, whether or not there's a body attached to it, or it's been used in some sort of crime, or perhaps stolen. Putting things kind of in order, stolen, I get 100%. I remember several years ago, I was at a gun show in Florida, and a gentleman was standing there. He had a Dan Wesson 357 Magnum and a 6-inch barrel. And I remember once upon a time, it seems like you used to be able to just like trip over Dan Wesson revolvers. Now I seldom see them, but he and I got to chatting, and he mentioned that he was selling that firearm for his father. And something about that person in general set off a small alarm bell in my head. Just something about the guy did not seem legit. He did not seem like he was being 100% honest or anything along those lines. And I started to wonder to myself, does your dad know that you're selling this gun? And that's a very viable concern, especially if somebody just freely admits that they are selling somebody else's firearm. In addition to that, it could be that could very well be the circumstances. It's not like I alerted the police or anything along those lines, just I decided not to continue to interact with that person. Firearms can go missing in any number of ways. People could legitimately be either too busy to try to sell their own gun, hand it off to somebody else in order to be a broker, or perhaps are not in a good state of mind and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to participate in the sale of their firearm. That's absolutely something that happens. And then there's also thieves. Now, in addition to that, sometimes guns do get used in crimes, and those people do offload or do attempt to offload those firearms in a variety of different ways. I have known a couple of people to have a gun come back as hot, be it stolen or used in some sort of crime. It is a risk that can be taken. Some of that is paying attention to who it is that you're getting it from. If you're buying a used gun from a shop, the serial number has already been run. So unless it just hasn't come up in a crime or anything along those lines yet, you should be okay. If you're buying from a private person, you should probably be a little bit more aware of the type of person it is that you're buying the gun from. All right, that's the kind of myths and misconceptions type of thing. I want to go ahead and lay down some ground rules that I take into account, because I buy lots of guns. I buy most definitely used guns and all that kind of stuff. And there's a couple of things that there's a couple of personal rules that I've developed over the years when it comes to shopping for firearms. The first thing I want to lead off with is we are not going to be talking about military surplus guns. That is a completely different topic. Like it would be so much of a rabbit hole that it kind of requires its own video. But one rule that I hold very strongly is I do not buy firearms, used guns, off the internet, specifically off of GunBroker. I've seen quite a few people get burned on GunBroker purchases. It is incredibly difficult for somebody to actually be able to show you all of the nitty-gritty pieces of the gun to make sure that it is in the condition that you want to warrant the value that it's being assigned. In addition to that, function becomes my primary concern, because that's what I found for the most part. Sure, somebody can give you tons of pictures to be able to show you like where the pitting is or where a stock is dinged and all that kind of stuff. But if the shell stop on that shotgun isn't holding the shotgun shells in the magazine during cycling and you wind up with a bunch of malfunctions, that's something that doesn't get caught in a picture, even if somebody posts a video of it shooting. That does not mean that it shoots like that every time. So specifically GunBroker I have a problem with, because it's like eBay. It's just a bunch of individual salesmen all on one centralized site. You could have some good guys out there, you could have some turds, and I 100% believe that there's a very solid mix of both. And it is buyer beware to figure out who it is that you're dealing with. Now, if you go to like Bud's Guns or a lot of other sites that do deal in used guns, I feel more comfortable because those are actual brick and mortar stores. Those are people that you can actually go to for accountability and stuff like that. They have access to gunsmiths. If there is something wrong with the gun, they will hopefully have identified that beforehand, or to sell the gun as is and be very honest about its condition. So, not a big fan in general of buying things off the internet. I try to avoid it as much as I can because I am not a very patient person. When I buy something, when I give you my hard-earned money, I expect a good in return. And when I have to then like sit and wait a couple of days in order to be able to get the good that I ordered, I get really antsy. Like I'm that guy who like hits, pay now or whatever, and then I go sit at the door like waiting for my package to arrive because I want it. I want it now. I paid money. Give me my thing. However, it's not like I don't shop online, so just keep that in mind. I don't normally buy guns online, that's for sure. Okay, what about like modifications and stuff like that, Murph? Like, aren't you concerned about the condition of the firearm and all that kind of stuff? Absolutely, of course I'm concerned about the condition. I want to make sure that it's functional and all that kind of stuff, which is another reason I don't like buying guns on the internet. I want to make sure that I handle them beforehand and have an opportunity to be able to do a little bit of an inspection. Modifying firearms is an incredibly popular thing, especially if you're talking about like Glocks or XDs, Smith & Wessons, whatever it is that it may be. Lots of people like to go out there and they swap out the sights. They go and they get them cut for optics. They stipple the grips. They do all these different types of things. And the important thing to understand is what changes they made, how that impacts the value, and whether or not you have any interest in those changes. Now, someone sends out a slide to go get milled. Okay, cool. That's nice. It fits an optic perfectly, all that kind of stuff. Did the milled area get finished or in some way guarded from moisture, or was that slide rusting with the exposed metal? That's something you have to be concerned about in those types of situations. Triggers are a fantastic example. Somebody went and installed an aftermarket trigger. Hey, you need to be aware of that trigger. You need to understand how that trigger functions. Did that trigger deactivate some of the safeties of the firearm? Because some police departments will not let certain triggers into their ranks because they deactivate like Glock safety features. So you need to know that beforehand so that you, the person who owns that gun, made that conscious trade-off. Now you are potentially purchasing and then inheriting their conscious trade-off. You need to be aware of that conscious trade-off in order for you to be able to act accordingly, in order for you to be able to assess and appraise that firearm in the appropriate light so you know what it is that you're getting, and also utilizing that for negotiation. Because if you don't like the trigger, but you do want the gun, now you have a bargaining chip here. Stipling, same type of thing. Did they send it off to get professionally stippled, or did they just sit in their garage one day with a soldering iron and just go ahead and do like their own basket weave on a grip? Does it actually feel good, and does the workmanship look good? Or is this something that you're going to pass on because this looks like crap? Those are perfectly acceptable things to have happen at that point. Another rule is make sure that you're very intimately aware of what it is that you're getting involved with. This is more so, I think this is more important in like a military surplus type sense, but if somebody's coming up to you and saying, oh, this gun's like super rare, these are so hard to find, or something along those lines, do your research beforehand. Do not make impulse purchases. So it's a very, in general, like I'm not an impulse purchase kind of guy. I very seldom make impulse purchases. And if I do make impulse purchases, it's because I have an appreciable amount of knowledge about that particular item in order to be able to make a determination on the spot. So just because somebody tells you it is what it is, or that it's super rare or anything along those lines, check it out beforehand. Right now, like I said before, I haven't seen Dan Wesson firearms in a while, but I know that Dan Wesson's out there. I know that there are plenty of revolvers out there on the market that they're not terribly rare, and that somebody trying to upsell me on the rare Dan Wesson is not telling the truth at that point. Now, myself personally, I am not interested in used Glocks for the most part because I get Glock qualified professional pricing on things, just like I do a SIG and like Smith & Wesson and a whole bunch of other manufacturers. So manufacturers that I can get a hold of guns out of their qualified professional catalog, I don't have a lot of interest in them used because the prices aren't that different. I can just turn around and buy something new for what someone else is trying to sell used. In addition to that, Glocks have kind of flooded the market. There's a ton of them out there. Anybody who's trying to put a price on a Glock anywhere near MSRP is just so far out of their league at that point. There's so many options around. So you should not be paying a lot for a used Glock, just based solely on the number of guns that are out there. All right, guys, that's our ground rules. Why don't we go ahead and start talking about things that I assess whenever it is that I'm looking at a used firearm. Okay, so first off, right off the bat, I'm going to look over the gun and I'm going to check its overall condition. How's the finish looking? Are there nicks, cracks, scuffs, anything like that in like the grips or the stocks or anything along those lines? If they're wood grips or stocks, does it still have like its clear coat and all that kind of stuff? Are there any clear signs of pitting or anything along those lines? I'm just going to go ahead and get that overall appraisal. And that's because if you look into a lot of pricing guides and stuff like that, they have a breakdown as to how much finish remains or, you know, damage and all that kind of stuff. What that qualifies the condition as: good, very good, excellent, new in box, whatever it is that it may be. And you can utilize those types of resources in order to be able to help narrow down what the overall cost is going to be. And we'll talk about that more when we talk about resources later. So I'm going to start appraising the condition of the firearm itself. And I'm going to start getting an idea in my mind, like if I know the original MSRP or I look at what it's being listed for right now, is that starting off with being very consistent with where I expect this to go before it's all said and done. I'm going to go through and I'm going to check for any type of wobble. So if I'm looking at like an AR-15, I'm going to check and make sure that the castle nut's properly secured. If I cannot see that it is staked, I'm going to go ahead and move that buffer tube around a little bit and see if I have any type of wobble or anything that I have to come back around and tighten up. Same thing with rails and stuff like that. I'm going to check to make sure that a handguard has been properly installed, that it mates all the way up against the receiver itself. In general, I don't have an interest in somebody else's home-built AR-15 because I have no idea where it is that they cut corners. Years ago, I purchased an Anderson lower off of a buddy of mine who had already installed a lower parts kit. It is now the lower that I built my Mark 12 MOD Murph around. If you're interested in that, go ahead and check out the link in the description. My friend wound up installing an incredibly cheap mil-spec trigger in there that did not have in-spec trigger pins, and I was having issues with the trigger. So I wound up taking those out and I replaced the trigger. He made a conscious trade-off there that he didn't feel like spending a lot of money on a lower parts kit. Maybe I would not have skimped there. Maybe he could have wound up skimping somewhere else that would have wound up causing me long-term issues in the future. That's something that I'm very concerned about whenever it is that I'm appraising someone else's build. I have very specific requirements and pieces and parts that I want on an AR-15. I'm going to inspect those things, and if it's a home build, I may still not buy it just because I cannot quantify or qualify the person who put it together. Now, if I know the guy, and I know he does good work, I know he takes his time, I know he's very particular about things and all that kind of stuff, sure, I will buy a assembled AR-15 from a friend, but I'm not going to buy it from some rando out there, that's for sure. Same with like a Polymer 80 or something along those lines. If I'm looking over like shotguns and stuff like that, I'm going to go ahead and check for like any slop in the the forestock or anything along those lines. Shotguns are a little bit difficult. I'm definitely going to check to make sure that something like the vent rib's not bent. And I'm going to check for any rattle or anything along those lines. Same thing in an AR-15. I'm going to check to make sure if it has if it's supposed to have two beads, that it has both of the beads, because it's quite frequent that the rear bead is broken off. And I'm going to be very aware of any issues, any cracks that might be developing around the pistol grip, which we can kind of see an example of that on this Model 1148, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. If we look here, we can see what is really just a scratch, but it's not that unusual on some of these older shotguns for there to be splits or anything like that running down the tang or into the pistol grip. So that's some stuff I'm going to keep an eye out on. We can see here that we have some scuffs and some scratches in the wood and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I'm appraising whatever it is that I'm looking at these types of shotguns, or any type of shotgun, in order to kind of get an idea, a feel for what it is that's going on with it. If it's a double barrel shotgun, I'm going to check for Damascus barrels. If it has Damascus barrels, I really don't have any interest in it because they're really not going to be rated for smokeless powder, and I don't have a need for black powder 12 gauge. AKs, if I'm looking at like AKs, I'm not interested in a Nodak Spud receiver built gun unless it's coming from a reputable custom AK manufacturer. Especially if it's a 5.45. There were a lot of issues with early 5.45 builds. The barrels were not proper. There was something to do with the chambers, with the actual bore dimension and all that kind of stuff, to where they were not working properly with 5.45 ammunition. If I built a 5.45 gun, I would be less concerned. If I picked up somebody else's build for a 5.45 or really any AK at that point, I would be much more concerned. In AKs in general, you also kind of need to know your background a little bit. So like if you come across a Century Arms and it's like a RAS 47. Okay, well those had a lot of issues once upon a time with the cast trunnions that were in them. And it was a big controversy on YouTube and the internet for quite a while. You may not necessarily want to buy older American-made AKs. It seems that the American-made AK is starting to get better and better as time has gone on, but there's still a stigma about them, and it's important that you research it. Of course, the AK Operators Union is a fantastic resource to go to. Also, Clayco 47 is someone that's worth listening to whenever it comes to AKs. Those two channels on YouTube are fantastic resources when it comes to appraising AKs. There's also, in general, a lot of opinions out there when it comes to other AKs and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of things that you can use to inform your opinion when it comes to AK. So take, for example, if you were looking at a Wasser 10 underfolder. Okay, I remember when Wasser 10s cost under $500. It is very difficult to find an AK for under, a new AK for under $500, let alone a used AK. So if I were to be looking to buy a Wasser 10 right now, I would expect that I would be paying in excess of $500 for it. So right off the bat, I need to start appraising whether or not that's worth it to me. I know at one point I can get them for $500. And though the guns are still being imported, they're coming in for around $1,000. So now it becomes a really weird like back and forth of trying to find a Wasser 10 that I'm not, a used Wasser 10 that I'm not trying to spend $1,000 on, but because then I just turn around and buy a new one. But I still am not going to get under $500 most likely. So you have to take that kind of like cost benefit analysis there and figure out like how much is the gun really worth to you, which is going to kind of be a mantra all throughout this. When you're looking at these different features and issues with the gun and all that kind of stuff, what is the cost, what is the price point that makes the gun interesting to you? So in the case of a Wasser 10, is it $750? Is it $800? Is it $900 that makes it interesting to you? Or do you only want it for $500 and below? In which case you're probably going to be at a Wasser 10. Now for some people, because once upon a time there's a lot of controversy surrounding the Wasser 10, some people might say that that's great, you really shouldn't be spending that much on it. But look at Norinco AKs. Any of your Chinese AKs have tripled for the original prices that they came in at, and quite a few people sneer at that. However, cost, supply and demand. Chinese AKs are not coming in, so they are going to appreciate. Now you have to decide, is it worth it to me to have a Chinese AK in the collection, or am I going to go get something a little newer, like a Zastava or something along those lines, in order to be able to scratch that AK itch? You have to decide that for yourself. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about handguns, because I have quite a few things that when it comes to handguns. Night sights. Especially if you're looking at police trade-ins and stuff like that, it's important to go ahead and check to see if the night sights are still working. I picked up my SIG P226 double-action Kellerman several years ago, and one of the first things I checked on it were the night sights, because most police departments seem to change out their guns every 8 to 10 years, which also happens to be the shelf life of tritium for most night sights. So I checked them, didn't seem like they were very vibrant. I told that to the guy at the shop. He went ahead and knocked off a couple bucks. I wound up going home with it and actually finding that the night sights are in fantastic shape. I just wasn't doing a good job of shading them in the gun shop. Whatever, that worked out for me. I have seen plenty of night sights in gun shops that were absolutely dead. So that's something to check right off the bat. You're probably gonna have to replace those sights. You can go ahead and use that as part of your negotiation whenever it comes to the back and forth on trying to get this gun. When it comes to semi-autos like this Glock 41, previously has been on the channel, link in the description, there are quite a few things that you can go ahead and check out. So, some places are not very happy with you disassembling their firearm. However, you can go ahead and check and see like how much abuse the barrel has taken on the outside so far. That gives you an idea of how many times it's been cycled. In addition to that, you can also check out the breech face, see how much abuse that has taken to be able to tell how many rounds have really gone through the gun. The more beaten up, the more shiny those parts are, the more used the gun is. You can start to assess that there's been quite a few rounds put through them. Now, many gun shops get very concerned about somebody disassembling firearms, mostly because they're afraid that they're not going to be able to put them back together. Specifically, the person who took them apart, and then also the guy behind the counter. But you can still get a sense for how much finish has been worn off of these parts just by locking the slide to the rear. You don't have to disassemble the gun in this case. Now, as we can see here, this Glock has an Overwatch Precision TAC trigger in it now. So somebody modified this trigger. Am I interested in the trigger that they put in here at this point, or is that going to either make this a no-go for me or something that I'm going to include in the negotiations? Now, I kept the original trigger, so if I were to sell this gun and somebody didn't want this particular trigger that was in here, I would go ahead and throw in the original trigger as well. But that's going to get into an accessories portion that we're going to talk about here at the end. Or here later on, I guess I should say. So, okay, that gun's been modified. I need to go ahead and take, hey, I need to start looking into that. What's that modification? What type of trigger is in that? If the finger grooves have been deleted and the grip retextured and all that kind of stuff. Like, those are things that I need to start paying attention to at that point. Those are going to be, that's just all external inspection and all that kind of stuff. Just going over the gun and figuring out what it is that's going on with it. We take a look at the Smith & Wesson Model 36 No Dash, previously reviewed on the channel, link in the description. The finish on this has quite a bit of wear, and there's some light pitting and stuff like that. There's a little bit of a nick in the muzzle. Like, this gun is definitely seen hard use, and I've put this gun through some very hard use. That's something that I'm going to want to pay attention to. In addition to that, you'll notice it more on stainless steel revolvers, but you can also see it here on this blued revolver. You have the rings around the chambers, which are very difficult to try to get cleaned off of there. You also have rings at the rear of the receiver here, where those cartridges have been set back over repeated firings and all that kind of stuff. That's stuff that's going to impact the value of the gun because that's finish that's been worn away. Okay. We've gone over what it is that I look for in a visual inspection. What about a mechanical inspection? Starting off with revolvers. I'm going to move the cylinder, and I'm going to check for how much wobble there is involved in this so that I can get an idea, if I have egregious wobble, which, keep in mind, guys, I'm not a gunsmith by any means, so I'm not getting in here with like feeler gauges and stuff like that, checking the cylinder gap off of the forcing cone and all that type of thing. That's not necessarily what it is that I'm doing. I'm just doing a quick check here to see, like, okay, I have some wobble here in the cylinder. Is this going to impact timing? Is this going to impact my chamber alignment with my forcing cone and all that kind of stuff, and either be dangerous or just have a lot of like lead ejecta coming out of the side here and potentially like hitting people next to me? I've had that happen before off of a very cheap revolver many moons ago. Okay, I'm also going to check for this all throughout the movement of the trigger here so that I can feel if I've got an excessive amount of back and forth with the cylinder. I'm going to check that end gap. So I'm going to wiggle this up and down and then side to side as best I can to see just how much the cylinder is moving around. Something else I'm going to check for is, do I have hammer touch off? When I cock the hammer, am I able to override that sear and send that firing pin home? So you can see in this case, I cannot. That's something to look out for. Now, in that case, maybe if you have an interest in the gun, that means that you're just, okay, cool, I have hammer touch off. So I'll just go ahead and bob this hammer so that it becomes a double action only gun at that point. I never have to worry about that hammer getting touched off. That is something that you could do at that point. Keep in mind, guys, these are just some of the things that I do. I'm sure that there are plenty of people out there with other tips and tricks on how to be able to quickly appraise the mechanical capabilities of a particular firearm. But something else that I found very helpful, this is a Springfield Armory 1911A1, is you should also check safety features. So here, I can go ahead and turn on the thumb safety, attempt to pull the trigger does not fire. That's cool. And then I can turn off that safety and avoid the grip safety and attempt to fire this. You'll frequently find in some 1911s, especially if they've been used in the competition circuit, the grip safety has been deactivated. I remember years ago, I was at a gun shop. I was looking over a used 1911. It seemed to be in fairly good shape. And that was the first test that I conducted. I went ahead and cocked the hammer. I did not touch the grip safety, and I pulled the trigger, and the hammer fell. The guy that was behind the counter also happened to be that shop's gunsmith, and he immediately put that gun behind the counter in order to work on it later. So those are some things that you should keep an eye out for. If a gun's supposed to have a magazine disconnect, you should go ahead and check to make sure that that magazine disconnect is working, or to check to see if it's been deactivated. That may change your interest in the gun. Also, it's not a bad idea to check to make sure that certain police trade-in guns don't have magazine disconnects added to them, even if the gun did not originally come with it. I think it was Brinks used to have Smith & Wesson M&P 1.0s and 40 Smith & Wesson, and they opted to have Smith & Wesson add a magazine disconnect. I'm pretty sure it was Brinks. I feel like I ran across a Brinks trade-in gun a couple years ago that had that feature added to it. So if you're somebody who doesn't like magazine disconnects, which would make you, in my opinion, a very logical person at that point, you may not necessarily want that firearm in your collection. You may not want it for any type of serious use or anything along those lines. Now, when you're looking at police trade-in guns in general, you're likely to see a lot of finish wear because the guns are carried a lot. However, they're not necessarily fired a lot, so they might still be in very good mechanical condition. Something that I'll check in AR-15s that I'm looking at, like older production guns and stuff like that, is I'll check to make sure that they have like M4 feed ramps and stuff like that, because I consider that to be a really important feature. I check to make sure that the staking on the gas key is as deep as it's supposed to be. That's something that I always check in pretty much every AR-15 whenever it is that I'm appraising one. Safeties. Checking to make sure that a safety is not too stiff, that you're actually able to actuate it, be it on a long gun or a handgun, whatever it is that it may be. That's always a great place to look. Okay, guys, I think that pretty much covers how it is that I assess or appraise different firearms, what it is that I'm looking for, what are resources that I use in order to be able to help me determine whether or not something is the right cost. Well, for years, I've used books like the Blue Book of Gun Values and then firearms catalogs like this. However, I've not refreshed these in years. That's one of the issues with using books, is you got to refresh them pretty consistently. And sometimes things don't make the updates. Now, one of the things that I don't like about the Blue Book of Gun Values is that it doesn't have pictures for the most part, and I'm kind of like a pictures kind of guy because, you know, I'm not terribly intelligent. And it helps me be able to track down guns if I don't know the exact model. If maybe I'm just seeing it in the catalog or something along those lines, or it's being mischaracterized in the case. All I can really go off of is just what I can see at that point, and this doesn't help. But if I already know the model, like the exact model it is that I'm looking at and all that kind of stuff, this book is very handy. Whereas this firearms catalog here, the standard firearms catalog here, has a ton of pictures in it. So it's pretty easy to be able to pick things out if I'm not entirely sure what it is I'm looking at to begin with. And I used to keep these books on hand whenever I would go to gun shows and stuff like that. Now, Murph, it's 2024. Why are you using books? Like, come on. Like, why do you have a library of pricing guides and stuff like that when you have the internet? And that's very true, but the internet's not always the easiest way to go about things. So you can go on Gunbroker and you can look at those guns being listed. And a lot of like gun shops or people selling guns will do so. They'll be like, oh, well, it's going for this price on Gunbroker right now. But there's an important distinction here. It might be listed for that price on Gunbroker, but I'm not interested in what the gun is listed for. I'm interested in what the gun sells for. And it's likely that the gun will wind up selling for less, because I can go ahead and take like a Ruger 1022 and list it for $1,000. But that does not mean that a Ruger 1022 is worth $1,000. It's only worth $1,000 if someone's willing to pay for it. If the gun winds up selling for $150, then the value is not $1,000, it's $150. That's a very important distinction to keep in mind here. This is why I like using True Gun Values. I think it's .com. I'll put the actual, I'll post a link in the description. How about that? So what I find fun about that, sometimes the vernacular that you have to use is a little wonky, and it can be a little bit difficult to find exactly, like only exactly what it is that you're looking for, but you can get pretty close. And then you can pick through sold or for sale items, like guns that have been listed, and you can start picking out like, okay, well, I can go to the sold portion of this. I can find, let's say, like here recently, I was helping a friend price an M&P Shield 2.0. And I put in M&P Shield 2.0 and it kept pulling up like the 1.0s, and it pulled up the M&P Shield Plus and the EZ and all that kind of stuff. So I had to do a lot of scrolling in order to be able to pick out the Shield 2.0s that I actually wanted to look at. And I went to the sold category and I scrolled down there and I was looking at what the guns were selling for, and it turns out that somebody who offered him a price on his gun actually gave him a pretty good offer. I find that to be a really good resource. I think I prefer that to Gunbroker, but you guys use whatever combination of resources you want to use, because also I kind of use my calibrated eye. Over the years of spending all of my free time in gun shops and at gun shows and shopping on the internet and all that kind of stuff, because whenever I get bored, I take a look around the internet. I kind of, fantasize projects and builds and all that kind of stuff. I've been able to develop kind of an internal assessment on where value lies for me, or where intrinsic value lays and all that kind of stuff, in order to be able to determine how much it is that I actually want to spend on a given something. And I spend a lot of time diving into that research and trying to keep my finger on the pulse of what it is that's going on when it comes to firearms pricing. All right, let's talk about accessories real quick. So someone will come up, let's say I post this Glock 41 for sale, and it comes with the TLR1 and this Overwatch Precision tack trigger. Okay, well, someone comes along and they offer me money, but they say they don't want the TLR1 trigger, or the TLR1 light, and they don't care for the trigger. Here's the conundrum that I'll be in. Sure, I can take this light off and put it on something else. I might just do that anyway. But the trigger? The Glock 41 takes very specific triggers. You can't just use any Glock trigger. So I can't just pull this out and go drop it in my Glock 34. Given what generation of Glock or whatever firearm it is that you're selling, you may not be able to just rip that trigger out and throw it into any of your other guns or any other gun like it. So if someone decides that they don't like this trigger, I'm going to wind up eating the cost of this trigger, because I can't necessarily turn around and offload it. That's the same kind of thing whenever it is that you're talking about like holsters. Okay, that holster might work for you, but I may not care for your holster choice. Someone coming along, selling something like the Smith & Wesson Model 36, and they're selling it paired with like an outside the waistband holster, but I have every tendency of using this as an ankle gun. Well, I don't really care for your outside the waistband holster, and I don't care to pay you for your outside the waistband holster. In addition to that, even if I do want the outside the waistband holster, I am not really encouraged to give you full price, or really even a good price for that holster, because if I buy your gun and you don't have a gun to fit that holster anymore, what do you do now? You throw it away. You just wind up, I guess you could, out of principle, just throw it away so that somebody else doesn't necessarily get the value derived from that. But it doesn't really do you any good to keep something for a gun that you no longer have. Same with like whenever people sell firearms with like niche ammunition, like 357 SIG or 10 millimeter. Oh yeah, well, I'll sell you the gun and I'll say, 1,000 rounds of ammo. I have zero intention of paying them fair market price for that 10 millimeter. Unless it's someone I know, I'll go ahead and give them the friend price. But if they don't have other 10 millimeters on hand, man, this sounds like a buyer's market right now at that point. If I want to be mean about how much it is that I want to pay for the ammunition, I can choose to do so. And I think, in my opinion, it'd be pretty reasonable to do so. Now, everyone has to choose how scrupulous or scrupled they want to be whenever it comes to purchasing and all that kind of stuff. But when it comes to my money, I am very jealous about guarding it. I spend it. I have no problem spending my money, but that does not mean that I'm throwing it around like water. When I'm buying something from somebody, unless it is a friend, we are not friends. I'll be as fair as I can be. I'm not going to necessarily come in and lowball you and all that kind of stuff, because I understand that that's very annoying, and I just, from a moral standpoint, can't do that type of thing. But that does not mean that I'm going to pay you your asking price at or above market value. At that point, the deal has no interest to me, and me being the buyer, you need to generate interest. Now, one last thing that I want to talk about, whenever it comes to buying firearms, you have to be aware of your state laws as well. It's becoming more and more common for states to require that even private transactions be captured on a 4473 conducted at a gun shop and all that kind of stuff. Some states, you can still sell your legally purchased property to another legal person. Now, keep in mind, guys, the whole idea of states making people have to go to a gun shop or have to go through 4473 and do a background check and all that kind of stuff. The whole idea is to make sure that the firearm does not make it into the hands of a person who cannot own a gun. Felons and all that kind of stuff. Now, whether or not felons should be permanently punished for the crimes that they have performed after they have gone through the supposed recovery process is a whole nother conversation all by itself. But as it stands right now, felons cannot own firearms. And the whole goal is to make sure that law-abiding citizens are the only ones that have guns. That's why some states make you go and perform a background check. Now, I still chafe at the idea that I have to go and have this done in order for me to be able to transfer my legally owned property to another citizen. That seems dumb to me. I wouldn't do that for a couch. Why would I do it for a firearm? Regardless of the fact that, a firearm could be used lethally, I mean, I could drop a couch out of a window. I'm just saying. It's a little bit of a stretch, but you get the overall idea of what it is that I'm talking about. I own this stuff. Why do I have to go through a process in order to be able to transfer it? You just need to be aware of that type of stuff. In addition to that, I've lived in states where I did not have to conduct a background check for a private sale. However, the person who was selling me the used gun did still want to draw up a bill of sale in order to be able to track that purchase so that if anything came back to them, they had proof that the firearm had been transferred away from them. I am more than happy to accommodate that type of thing. I don't consider that an insult or anything along those ways. That person is just trying to make sure that they cover themselves in the best way legally. And I've purchased several firearms from friends, even people who know me, who know that I'm not necessarily going to turn around and go on a shooting spree or use them to like rob banks or something along those lines. Still had me fill out a bill of sale. No harm, no foul. Doesn't hurt my feelings at all. I get it. Whenever it comes to finances and legal type attributes, all bets are off. It's whatever makes that person comfortable at the end of the day that allows that bill, that sale to occur. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and I would love to know how it is you appraise used guns. Like, tell me little tips and tricks that you've come across over the years in order to help the collective better understand what it is to look for whenever it comes to appraising used guns. All right, guys, and with that, that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.